Ever feel like you're just drowning in complex information,
Hmm.
trying to piece together a massive puzzle, and you just want to see the big picture, get the core idea without getting totally lost.
Yeah, bogged down in the details.
Exactly. And that's really what we try to do here on the deep dive. We take these complex topics, these intricate discussions, and we pull out the really key insights, sort of your shortcut to understanding what matters.
It's about getting straight to the heart of it, really. We go through the source material, maybe it's a dense article, maybe a discussion like today's, and just, well, bring you the essential ideas, clearly.
And today, we're diving into something pretty interesting. It's from Korea, a discussion titled "Oh Fifth Practical Research of Entity." Now, okay, that might sound a bit technical right off the
That
bat.
does sound a bit formal, yeah.
But our mission really is simple. It's to understand the basic building blocks of how we organize information, these things called entities, and crucially, how they connect. Think of it like understanding the DNA of data.
And while, yes, it comes from data modeling, the principles we're going to talk about are, well, surprisingly relevant everywhere. Whether you're just organizing your thoughts for a project or trying to figure out how a system works,
Right.
grasping these core ideas is useful.
Absolutely. So if you're what we call the learner, you want knowledge efficiently, you like seeing different angles, getting those aha moments without the jargon headache, then you're in the right place.
In helping us navigate this,
Mm.
as our expert, you will be giving us the analysis, the broader context.
Happy to. So this Korean discussion, it kicks off with a really neat analogy, a family tree.
Oh, right.
You've got a grandfather, a father, a son. We all kind of intuitively get the direct link, father-son. That's a first-degree relationship. Direct.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. And then the grandfather to the grandson?
That's indirect. It skips a generation.
Okay, let's unpack this. So the main point here, the big insight from the source, is that when we're designing how we store information, in data models, we mainly focus on those direct connections, the first degree ones. Exactly. And the why is fascinating. The discussion points out that indirect relationships like grandfather-grandson are often seen as sort of copies or derived information, especially in the early logical planning stage.
Logical planning.
Right. They matter more later when you're physically building the database or system. The priority up front is defining the absolute core things, the entities, and their immediate neighbors, how they link directly.
So you build a stronger foundation that way.
Precisely. You
Yeah.
focus on those immediate connections first. It makes the whole model more stable, more accurate, rather than trying to map every single possible indirect link right away, which can get messy.
Okay, so it's about laying that solid groundwork first. Understand the fundamental links before mapping out, the whole extended family.
Exactly. Which brings us nicely to the next key idea, absolute versus relative dependency.
Ah, yes, I remember this bit. This is the movie time travel thing, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine you go back in time, right? And you
Mhm.
change something that literally stops you from being born.
Okay. Dark, but I see the point.
That's absolute dependency. Your existence, your specific existence, completely depends on that original chain of events being untouched.
Right. And if you go back and, I don't know, change your breakfast cereal choice on a Tuesday, it might change things, but it doesn't stop you from existing.
Correct. That shows no absolute dependency regarding your existence itself. Your life might be different, but you still are.
Got it.
And they even bring up the Terminator. The whole mission is to prevent a birth. That highlights absolute dependency perfectly. The future they want to prevent hinges entirely on stopping that specific person from coming into being.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. So the core idea, the takeaway, is that an entity, any piece of core information, is absolutely dependent on its semantic subject.
Semantic subject.
Yeah, basically the fundamental reason or meaning for that thing to exist in the first place. It's like its absolute must-have prerequisite.
Going back to the family tree, the child is absolutely dependent on the parents for that initial biological contribution. The sperm and egg, essentially.
Yeah.
Without that specific child just wouldn't exist.
Okay, that makes sense. And to make this really practical, the discussion then looks at a contract entity. How do we find its semantic subject?
Right, and they use a classic framework: who, what, when, where. Surprisingly useful for a contract. The who, the main person or subject involved, that's the contract holder, the customer, basically.
Right. The thing the contract is about. In their example, it was an insurance product.
Yep. And the when, the key moment, the event, that's the contract date, when it was agreed upon.
So those three things, who, what, when, together, they define the core meaning, the semantic subject of that specific contract.
Precisely. And the insight is that using this kind of framework helps ensure you're capturing meaningful data. It prevents creating records that don't really signify anything concrete.
So if you were missing the who or the what, the contract record wouldn't really mean much, or its meaning would fundamentally change.
Exactly. Then they move on to another example, which gets a bit trickier. Material outbound data,
Yeah.
like stuff leaving a warehouse.
Right. This one felt a bit more nuanced. The question is, who or what is the key to its meaning? Is it the employee who asked for the material, or the department they work for?
And the critical thing they point out is, you need to figure out whose information changing would fundamentally alter the meaning of that outbound record.
Ah, okay.
They ask a great question. If an employee switches departments, does that old record of material going out still belong, logically, to the old department, or does it follow the employee?
And the answer isn't fixed, is it? It depends.
Exactly. It depends entirely on the business rules. If you're tracking sales performance, for instance, maybe the outbound transaction has to follow the salesperson no matter which department they move to.
What's fascinating here is how thinking about data changes actually helps you understand the true core meaning of the entity itself. It forces you to ask, what is this information really for?
Yeah, it clarifies the fundamental purpose.
And they highlighted a really useful technique there, asking if this specific piece of information changes, what else has to change, or who needs to know? That's a brilliant way to trace those essential dependencies and find the real semantic subject.
Really practical. Then they look at the where for the outbound data, the destination.
Right, which could be different places. They mentioned outbound processing, maybe a repair vendor, or directly to the customer.
Yeah, and they noted that a more, let's say, sophisticated data model might show these as exclusive options. The material goes to one and only one of those places.
Okay.
And that naturally leads into thinking about the level of detail. You might have a general outbound record, but then maybe more specific outbound details, or even down to individual outbound line items for each product shipped.
Ah, so the granularity matters. How much detail you capture affects the data structure.
Exactly. It shows how these different levels of detail relate. A summary, then details, then maybe even finer details.
And you, listening, might recognize this in your own work, right? You see summary reports, and then you can drill down into the details. Same idea.
The discussion then sort of loops back to common mistakes, really hammering home the need to define those direct first-degree relationships accurately first.
Like we said at the start.
Right. Indirect links, they're more for the technical build, the physical design, and always, always keep the meaningful subject, the semantic subject, front and center. That's your guide.
They even bring back the family tree and the terminator just to make sure that idea of absolute dependency really sticks. What makes something exist?
Then they shift gears a bit, talking about a group exercise they did. People were brainstorming potential entities. And this part has some really practical takeaways for anyone trying to organize information.
Yeah, this was good. They looked at terms like instructor and student. And the key question was, are these fixed identities or are they roles?
And the answer is context. Someone can be a student in one class and an instructor in another. So maybe person is the core entity, and student role or instructor role are relationships or attributes related to a specific context, like a course.
Right. And enrollment, the act of signing up for a course, they said that's not an entity itself.
No, it's a relationship. It connects a student entity to a course entity. It describes how they're linked.
And they warned about vague terms like user, too broad usually.
Yeah, needs sharpening. Is it a system user, a website visitor, a customer? Needs to be more specific to be a useful entity.
Same with workplace. They saw that as a relationship between a person and an organization. The organization is the entity.
Right, the workplace just describes the link.
Yeah.
And they distinguish between course offering a specific class instance, like History 101, fall semester, and the general course itself, like History 101.
One is the abstract idea, the other is a real-world instance.
Exactly. This raises an important question. How do we really tell the difference between a core entity, something relatively stable, and an event or a relationship that just connects entities?
That seems key.
Entities usually represent the nouns, the people, places, things, concepts. Relationships and events are more like the verbs or the links between them.
Okay. And finally, they look at evaluation and attendance. These usually aren't standalone entities either, are they?
Typically not. They depend on other things. And the trick is to ask of what or for whom. An evaluation of what course. Attendance for which student in which specific course offering. Those questions point you back to the core entities they depend on.
That's a great mental check. So after all that, they offered some practical guidelines for actually drawing these things out, for visualizing them.
Yeah, simple stuff but helpful. Use soft boxes, rectangles with rounded corners to draw your entities. Just a common visual standard.
Helps keep diagrams clear and name them clearly. Make the entity name really convey what it is.
And if your company uses some weird internal jargon, okay, maybe keep that term, but put the standard understandable term in parentheses next to it for clarity.
Good tip. Oh, and this was important. Don't use the same name for an entity, a thing, and an
Yeah.
activity, something that happens. Like, don't call your customer list sales. That's confusing.
Very confusing. An entity is a collection. An activity is a process. Keep them distinct. And don't mistake a specific type of entity for a whole new entity. Like business customer is probably just a type of customer, not a fundamentally separate thing.
Right. And this one really resonated. Every entity must have a conceptual identifier, that meaningful subject, even if you don't have a system ID number for it yet.
Like the newborn baby analogy. No name yet, but it still has a unique identity based on its parents. That
Makes
inherent identity exists.
Love that. And technically, they mentioned using the hashtag symbol for the identifier, the unique key.
And the asterisk for mandatory attributes, things that must have a value for that record to be valid.
Okay, so let's bring it back. What does all this data modeling talk mean for you, listening right now?
Well, even if you're never going to design a database,
Which is most people.
right,
Yeah.
understanding these basic ideas, how to spot the core elements, the entities, and how they're fundamentally linked, can honestly bring so much clarity to any complex information you face.
It really can. Just learning to see what truly stands alone versus what depends on something else.
Yeah.
That's a powerful skill for making sense of, well, almost anything.
It really trains your brain to break things down, doesn't it? To see the building blocks and how they fit. And you can use that anywhere, understanding work processes, reading research.
Absolutely. Analyzing those fundamental relationships is just a universally useful skill.
So maybe for your final takeaway today, just take a moment later, think about some information you deal with regularly. Could be work stuff, could be personal. What feel like the core entities
Mhm.
in that info?
Yeah, what are the main nouns?
And what are the absolutely essential links connecting them? What really exists independently? And here's a little thought experiment for you. Think about a process you know really well. Work, hobby, whatever. Can you pinpoint the absolute dependencies in it? What's the key semantic subject that, if you removed it, the whole thing would just collapse or cease to exist?
That's a good one to chew on. Well, thanks so much for taking this deep dive with us today. We really hope it's given you maybe a new lens, a clearer way to look at the information swirling around you.
Hope it was helpful.
And hey, if you found this kind of exploration useful, let us know. We're always keen to dive into topics that you find interesting.